Record. Mhm.
Hello, I'm Jeff Kramer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm here with Roger Carlson, the author of the Saving the World Before
Mhm.
Breakfast series of books. Together, we're saving the world before breakfast with infinite resources. And today, we're going to kind of do a little recap on the aftermath of the Canadian elections, and then Roger's got a special presentation that he wants to do for us on advances in 3D printing. Is that accurate?
Yeah. The revolution is gaining ground now.
Excellent.
Oh, and May 4, important thing to mention.
Yeah, that's right. Let's put some context in terms of the date
Mhm.
here. So it's yesterday's news, but the Liberals won a minority government. They were, I think, 4 seats short of getting a majority, and so in the English or Westminster New Westminster parliamentary system, basically it's a first past the post situation, similar to what's in the States. Whoever gets the most votes, that party gets in with a representative into the government.
Mhm.
Uh, and then there are so and so many seats in the House.
Mhm.
And if you have a majority, then your government is able to make rules and change laws and things without any hindrance, essentially, from the opposition. They get to make a lot of noise, but
Mhm.
ultimately, as long as your party is cohesive, you will stay in power. With
Mhm.
a minority government, and this is very typical in a lot of European countries where they have different systems,
Mhm.
quite often you need more than one party to form the government because no
Mhm.
one party has enough seats in the House. And that's where the situation we're in Canada with a minority government. And what that means is if the government brings in some legislation, um, then and it's unpopular and everyone else, all the other parties vote against it, it can bring down the government and
Mhm.
trigger a new election. So the Liberals, like I said, have they were just 4 seats shy of a majority. So as long as they don't do anything that's too egregious, they'll probably be supported by one or the other parties. There are
Mhm.
in Canada, we have the Liberals, the Canadian uh, Progressive Conservatives, um, and then we've got the New Democratic Party, which is a more left of center party to the Liberals. Then we got the Bloc Québécois, which is basically just a group of politicians from Quebec that are looking out for Quebec's interests and French language rights and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And their goal in the election is basically to hold the balance of power and just make sure that, you know, like I said, their issues are considered. And then we have one member of the Green Party that was elected as well. So with that, it's very interesting. When Mark Carney was running, he almost was echoing a lot of the Conservative Party's platform.
Mhm.
So one of the things Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, was saying was, well, he was really hoping that Trudeau wouldn't have stepped down and that he'd be running against Trudeau because Trudeau became an unpopular person by the end of his
Mhm.
term. Canada was had 10 years of stagnant economic performance, essentially stagnant. There was a few percentage
Mhm.
growth, but compared to the United States, we did very poorly. And then he also had axed the carbon tax. So Canada had put in a carbon tax, which made us less competitive in the world market. And very, very few oil producing regions have included a carbon tax. I think the only other exception might be Norway, where they've got a huge sovereign wealth fund and they're well along in their transition to get off of fossil fuels, but they're still a major supplier of fossil fuels. So they can afford to have a carbon tax and
Mhm.
stuff, but their competitiveness goes down because now you're paying more for your fuel, and that makes everything else cost more.
Mhm.
So those two things, one of the first things that Carney did after Trudeau stepped down was he basically eliminated the tax for individuals. Companies still have to pay it, but individuals don't. And their legislation, that was just a temporary measure, but the idea is that the legislation will be made more permanent after the government sits down. But then there were other things like Polyev was pushing for an energy corridor to get specifically to get Alberta crude and natural gas to Tidewater, and also to have a better distribution of electricity east to west, because we have a really good system north to south. Like, New York City gets a huge amount of hydroelectricity from Quebec. Ontario shares its electricity with the bordering states that they have, and
Mhm.
Manitoba likewise sells electricity into the United States. BC and Washington State and other states are integrated as well, but there's fairly weak connection east to west between the provinces. And this is one of the rallying cries, especially with
Mhm.
Donald Trump bringing in the tariffs to everyone, including countries that he negotiated free trade with in his last term. That really got our ire up, and it's obviously
Mhm.
affecting American markets, it's affecting imports from China, it's affecting everything. So the global markets are in upheaval at this point. And so
Mhm.
essentially they took on a term from hockey, elbows up. It's something like Gordie Howe used to say. And when people got on his wrong side. But anyway, like I guess the idea is you can play clean hockey, but if somebody's gonna get in your face, don't be afraid to get your elbows up. Anyway, so what else did Polyev say? He was talking about how expensive, because of immigration, how expensive housing has become for people. That's a very gross simplification, because housing is expensive for a multitude of reasons. I don't know if we covered this last time, I don't remember, but you
Mhm.
have speculative investors from places like Hong Kong going into the Vancouver market and buying up real estate, with the possible intention that if they ever need to get out of China, they've got someplace to go. And then you've got immigration into Toronto and other areas, which has created huge demand for housing.
Mhm.
But land speculators have been buying up the houses and turning them into Airbnbs so they can generate income. They have a business expense from it. And meanwhile, the land price is going up. So they're getting a good return on their investment in that way. But what it's doing is it's taking away available housing for middle income
Mhm.
families and lower income families. So the federal government isn't normally involved with housing in that regard. They help to set up national building code, but each province essentially adopts their version of the national building code, and then the provinces and the communities are responsible for determining things like, what kind of fascia you're allowed on your house, and what kind of buildings you can build, and all that sort of stuff. So uh, Pierre Poilievre made it a federal government issue, and the Liberals kind of stepped up and said, "Yeah, we'll do our part to help promote more housing." And so essentially, each of the things that Poilievre was basing his election on, the Liberals said, "Yeah, we're going to do something similar. Maybe not as far as the Conservatives might want to go, but enough to have swayed the vote." Now, the popular vote, very interestingly, I think there was only like 3 or 4 percentage points difference between the popular vote, and so the Liberals had something
Mhm.
like 44% or 45. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, so you can look it up on Wikipedia. But the Conservatives were only like three percentage points below that, and yet they ended up with, I don't know, more than 20 or 30 seats fewer than the Liberals did.
Mhm.
And but what should be noted is both the Liberals and the Conservatives gained a number of seats in this election. So the big losers in this election were the Bloc Québécois and hugely the NDP. The NDP ended up with only 9 seats across the country, and they actually have fallen out of official party status, which is a way that the government can support. Like the in Canada, you can get federal government funding if you're an official party,
Mhm.
and you get other benefits. So it would be as if the federal government was helping to pay for part of the Democrat or the Republican campaign. Each party gets a certain amount of money, and the idea is to kind of have a level playing field as long as the party has reached a threshold where they actually have a reasonable chance of winning a significant number
Mhm.
of seats. So, the Green Party isn't an official party. Now the NDP has dropped from official party status, but the Bloc, the Conservatives, and the Liberals are all still official parties.
Hmm.
So the fallout from that, well, one of the big things, I guess, the first thing on the agenda for the Carney government is to help work with the provinces to try to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers. And it's a really kind of crazy situation because, of course, trade is a provincial thing, but international trade and interprovincial trade falls under federal jurisdiction. And what's happened is you have these crazy rules, like one province might require you to have winter tires on your trucks, and another one might allow all seasons or something like this. And what it means is that uh, if your truck gets caught going into the other province and you have the wrong kind of tires, then you get pulled over, and of course that becomes a problem for trade. And that's just like a silly example, but those kinds of things are all over the place. And so what Alberta actually has been trying to work to eliminate trade barriers, particularly with our neighboring provinces. And our previous premier, with Jason Kenney, was big on trying to get that started. But now with and most of Canadian trade goes north-south. So Ontario, like I
Hmm.
said, is trading with the American states more than they do with Quebec or Manitoba, and likewise for the other provinces. So, Alberta crude will go through Alberta, maybe into Saskatchewan, and then down into the States or through British Columbia to international partners. But essentially, we're exporting out of the country as opposed
Hmm.
to the other provinces for the most part.
Hmm.
And it's actually a very expensive policy, and it's been because of animosities over the years, and like Quebec especially, because they speak French and they want to have a distinct society. They have different rules than everybody else, so their whole legal system actually is based on French law as opposed to English law, and that was something that the crown allowed after Quebec was conquered all those years ago. And it actually was
Yeah.
a sticky,
Centuries ago, yeah.
yeah, it was a sticking point with the American revolutionaries too. They said, why should Quebec be treated any differently than the rest of us? So it was one of their points of, I don't know, reasons to rebel against the crown. Anyway,
Hmm.
so his main thing, he says he wants to, by July 1st, which is Canada Day, he wants to have negotiated a deal with the provinces to eliminate most of the interprovincial barriers. And that'll be huge. That
Yeah.
means,
Yeah, I'd never heard about that before. That's a whole new thing for me. I didn't know about
yeah, like,
interprovincial trade being in the States. People try to come up with things and then they goes to the Supreme Court and say, no, 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 you can't have something different, and you can't charge a tariff from Connecticut going to New York or something.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you got like the Interstate Trade Commission, and I guess this is kind of like they want to set up something to eliminate the barriers. And estimates are that if we could eliminate the barriers and have more trade interprovincially, that could be the equivalent of about $5,000 per capita in Canada. So
Wow.
that would go a long ways to
Hmm.
helping to make up for the loss of trade that we're going to see to the United States with all the tariffs and stuff.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much I don't know, in a nutshell, what I think the fallout has been. Now, in Alberta, we have a group of people that want to separate Alberta from the rest of Canada, and they think that
Hmm.
we could go it alone much better. I think it's ridiculous, but some people estimate that up to 30% of Albertans are in favor of separating it. And
Hmm.
I think it's kind of crazy because, like, even though the Liberals got reelected, and yes, the Liberal government under Trudeau was very anti-oil development and stuff. We'll see how Carney's government comes out. But
Hmm.
during the election, he was saying, yes, I support a trade corridor, and at the very least, developing like either a pipeline or building the railway network out to Hudson
Hmm.
Bay so Alberta crude can get out part of the year through Hudson Bay to Europe and stuff like this. And that would be a huge benefit. Our our premier, Daniel Smith, would like to see Alberta double the oil production. And if we were able to double oil production, we would be only second or third, I guess, to Russia and Saudi Arabia in terms of oil production, just our
Mhm.
province alone. So,
So they'd be ahead of the whole United States.
well, the United States, I'm talking about international, like selling across borders. The United States produces more oil than any country, but they use almost all of it domestically.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so it's just the trading. Okay, yeah, because I was wondering about. Uh, I clicked on a couple things about the independence movement, uh, and it's legal according to the Canadian Constitution that Canada
Yeah,
has,
yeah.
but it
It,
was
it,
also legal for states in the United States to do it, and that then it in 1861, then it turned into a war. So,
well, so it's legal, but now because Quebec they had a referendum in the 90s, I think 92 or something, and like 49% of Quebecers said, yeah, we want to have what they called sovereignty association, but nobody defined what sovereignty association was. So they were proposing we'd still use the Canadian dollar, we would still, allow stuff to
mhm,
be going through the province, but we would have more rights on, immigration and other things that are normally looked after by the federal government. And that spooked everybody. And so after that, the federal, the national courts, the Supreme Court of Canada, looked at that question and determined what would it take for a province to legally separate from confederation, and they came up with a whole list of rules, and among them was you need to have like indigenous agreement because all of Canadian land essentially, the indigenous people have claim to that, and unlike the United States, where the United States conquered Indian groups, the indigenous groups here in Canada made treaties for the most part with the
mhm,
crown, and so essentially said, yeah, you can come in and live on this land and use it and all these sorts of things. We'll have our specific, we'll take the best territories that are the hunting grounds, and you'll be responsibility. It'll be your responsibility to look after us, I guess, in terms of payments and stuff like that. And so every Indigenous group in Canada, that signed
mhm,
treaties has rights. So they still have the right to go hunting and fishing. They don't need to have any permits or anything to do that. And that's not just on their territory. They can do that pretty much anywhere. Um, they also have, like I said, they get some funding and stuff from the federal government that helps. And then how that money is used through the band council or the chief or whatever system that they've got set up, that's their business because they're an independent nation. And so there have been cases where the band council will pay themselves outrageous prices, and the rest of the community is living in almost poverty. So unfortunate, but it happens.
mhm. Okay, that's all right. We've got to. We'll see what happens because it's been so surprising. It used to be, well, Canada, they had we all got
Well,
done and had a Labatt's and relaxed, and that's over till the next election in 5 or 6 years. So,
we'll see.
mhm.
I mean, if you want to talk about elections and stuff like that, we could probably do a whole session on Donald Trump in the first 100 days.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's yeah, he's both both the prime minister and the president are historic figures now, and probably are going to be more so. But anyway, I
Yeah.
guess yeah, I can we can get on to additive manufacturing, and I was going to do more, but do a quick background on it, and then you can jump into things. A lot of which are uh, were particularly focused would be useful for Canada, as we'll see here. So meanwhile, I'll
Mhm.
do a quick share, and there I am, and I better go to the top on this. There it is. We'll start with some science fiction here. The 3D printing revolution is gaining speed. And I started with back in 1964, one of the science fiction authors talked about duplicators, and it brought up something that is now come to pass, where he shows up on this one planet and they have a machine that can copy just about anything. But the whole place, the civilization apparently fell apart. They didn't know why, and finally figured out that having a duplicator that would duplicate anything suddenly was no benefit to invent because somebody else could just copy it totally. But
That's an interesting idea.
however, there is in the real world, there's ways around that. But
So
anyway,
hang on, are you saying these duplicators were like microscopic reverse engineers?
yeah, it'd be like from the ground up. Essentially, it would be they were 3D printers of anything you wanted. Of course, for fun, there was another alien species that were they were kind of like pigs. They didn't really have hands to do stuff, but they would talk about stuff and whatnot. Anyway, he started a revolution amongst them because he could also make beer. So he was doubly popular besides being the rebel leader. He got the thing working and got him beer. So anyway,
In the kingdom of the blind, the guy who can make beer is king.
exactly. You got it. Put up. All right, so get into the details. What is it? Just a reminder for you probably already know it being an engineer, but some other people might not do it. It's 3D printing. It's also called additive manufacturing. And ordinarily, machining is they might stamp something out, but they usually have to at least grind it or sand it or some way to trim things off. They have to cut it in pieces. So they're taking things away. With additive manufacturing, if you make it work, you'll have much less waste material because you just make the things that you're going to have. And they also called it stereolithography. And it's like it's a stream of liquid or particles, and a laser hits it, or some acoustics hits it, or something that makes it a solid thing. And that, of course, another technology that stands out, nanotechnology. Well, if they're doing particles frequently to get the right size for it to work, well, there's nano, which has also been called a second industrial revolution. Well, it's nanotechnology is part of the 3D printing.
Do you know, before you go on to the next slide, so do you know where lithography comes from, the term?
Oh, this sounds like a good as a documentation person, I was always interested in that. Where does litho? Actually, it's rock.
Exactly, exactly. Rock and graphy, being images. So it's from the like printing press. It was a type of technology where they would carve stuff into stone, kind of like wood cutting,
Mm-hmm.
and then you use that to for your printing press. Actually, the Chinese printing system is kind of like that, where they use the blocks and all that sort of
Yeah,
stuff,
they use wooden blocks, and so
or
going
clay
with the
blocks.
lead that Gutenberg did, that was an advance because he could, and the Western language has fewer letters, whereas Chinese has thousands of letters, I think.
Yeah.
Some much less common, but in English or even like English, like 26 letters plus maybe a dozen or 15 symbols that use a lot, periods, commas, question marks,
Yeah. If
things.
I can find it, I'll show you a great example where it's a lady in China. She does the whole process from, digging out the clay, cleaning the clay, making it into squares, then carving each individual square with a Chinese symbol on it, and
Mm,
then turning it into a printing thing, and then they would print like banners
mhm.
with the text and stuff. It's
Yeah.
quite an art. Anyway, I
Mhm.
just that's an aside. Sorry about that. But interestingly, they chose
Mhm.
to call it stereolithography, even though that technology, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't that the one where they basically had layers of paper and they would cut each layer of paper, and then you'd end up having a finished shape at the end of it?
Oh, I didn't know. I just heard, it was in the documents, the history. It's like, well, and this guy invented stereolithography.
Right.
I think it was with plastic.
Yeah, well, what they did, there was one type in the early days back in the 90s. Essentially, what it was you had like stickers, and you imagine a full sheet of paper that's sticky on one side,
Mhm.
and then you would cut it, and then you could like punch out the holes that you from the areas that you didn't want it, and
Mhm.
you end up getting a 3D model built up essentially out of layers of paper.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Well, hopefully it's a little fancier now because the computer does it all.
Exactly, exactly.
Anyway, let's see. What do we got here? And I was going to say, if you're going to have an industrial revolution, the steam industrial revolution was about 3 centuries. And I was surprised. A Spaniard, Geronimo de Ayans y Beaumont, he had a steam engine to drain mines way back in 1606.
Hmm.
The British apparently didn't check in with the Spanish neighbors. Of course, they were fighting wars off and on, so maybe that was part of the reason. Anyway, 1698, Thomas Savery invented the concept, but he had the concept. He really couldn't build anything. So nothing happened until he got with Thomas Newcomen, who built something that kind of worked. And then, funny, I think it's in July for both things, 1776, just like the American Revolution started. Well, the technical revolution of Watt and Boulton, they had a so much better steam engine that they did that really got things going. And then there's a couple, once the patent ran out on the steam engine that Watt and Boulton had done, then these two other guys, Trevithick and Evans, they each had companies. They did higher pressure, which Watt and Bolton were a little cautious about that. They said, "Well, gee, it's they could explode a lot. Boiler explosions would be awful." And
Yeah,
indeed,
and most people aren't aware that the Watt steam engine was really a vacuum engine, so there was never more than atmospheric pressure in it,
mhm. Yeah,
or maybe slightly more, but basically around atmospheric pressure. It derived its power from condensing the steam and drawing atmospheric pressure down to
mhm.
move the piston.
Yeah. But once there was competition, uh, Watt and Bolton bit the bullet and said, "Okay, we'll make high pressure engines." And over the centuries now, there have been boiler explosions,
Mhm.
but it was so much more power that they were small enough that you could run trains and steamboats.
Yeah.
That started in 1801, and shortly after that, in this country, the first steam engine went up the Hudson.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really interesting from an engineering perspective, and the ASME boiler and pressure vessel code came out because of all of those boilers exploding, and really what the limitation was a limitation on material science because you couldn't at the time determine if a piece of steel, or mostly they were using still cast iron in a lot of those cases, but
And brass.
and brass, yeah. So they didn't have consistent material properties
Hmm.
throughout the piece, and
Hmm.
so all you needed was one flaw to cause a boiler failure, and it was a common part of life. Unfortunately, hundreds of people
Hmm.
would die if, say, a boiler on a steam river ferry or something like that, a paddle
Hmm.
exploded, and or a rail, a locomotive exploded or something like that. It's just outrageous how many people died in those kinds of explosions.
Hmm.
But out of that, we learned a lot about material science. We learned a lot about thermodynamics because in the early days they weren't concerned about how much energy or how much efficiency you got out of it, and so early steam engines were running down at 5% efficiency or less.
Hmm.
And then they started studying, you have Lord Kelvin and others looking at how does energy move from one form to another, how is it converted, all those
Hmm.
sorts of things. So very interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, a quick thing about where it started out with just prototyping of with plastics. So you want to make a little, when want to make your own tchotchkes here and there, any shape you want, you can put them in there and make them. And then they moved to aluminum parts by the 90s and the 2000s. They started working their way up to high performance things and even high performance metals, and then even getting uh, fibers of one sort, and that's like for composites. So that gets much more complicated because you're trying to put two things together at the same time,
Mhm.
and it was hard enough to the first place, and that's part of why it's been slow. And then likewise, they're doing concretes, and it's finally, or actually, I'll back up in the 19 early 80s. I went to a futures conference down in San Diego, and there was a fellow who I'd like to track it down because he was a Chilean, and he said, "Well, here's the concept how it would work if you have a piece of machinery that has a breakdown, or if you want to just build something exotic, you don't, and you're in some place like rural Chile or Canada or Siberia or Montana."
Or on a US
Or
Navy ship in the middle of the Pacific.
yeah, or Navy ship. Uh, if you need something in a hurry, you have to wait several days for it to arrive, and it's expensive to ship. But if you can just make a one thing, and there I says, well, what you do is you just have a, a a fee for the license to make that part, and so you might have to like, hey, what is it? I have to pay $50 for the fee, and then the place makes it for another $50. But if the part is it has to be shipped, and that costs you know 35 or $40 by itself, and then the part is something, it would still be cheaper to make your own parts
Mhm.
because it cuts down so much on the transportation, and that gets around the issue that the science fiction writer Murray Leinster was talking about. Well, you'd get your pay because you'd have you'd have a right. You'd be selling your design, and for some length of time, if somebody wanted to build that thing, they had to pay you each time they made it, even though they have their own thing. So that's one of those issues, I guess, with trade with China. It's like they forget to pay the licensing fees, intellectual property sort of issue.
Yeah, they don't have very strong intellectual property for non-Chinese citizens. You went back a slide there, so I'm not
Whoop,
sure if you hit the back button or something.
did I went to, oh
Yeah,
yeah, there we
that's
go. Sorry, yeah, back to there. So anyway, now for all those reasons, it was high tech, but it wasn't a major slice of markets. But now I think it may be ready to pop. I think the Matt Ridley was talking about. He was quoting some other people who said that inventions have this thing where it's like an impossible dream, and then somebody has an invention which they're trying to formulate, and there's euphoria. Everybody wants to be involved in it, and then a number of entrepreneurs go broke, and they says, "Well, it's never going to happen," and then finally they eventually get able to build it, and then they say, "Well, it's always been there."
Yeah, well, it's
So,
that Peter Diamandis quote, right? The day before something is a great success, it's a crazy idea.
yeah, and there's just a couple of steps in between. So that's happened in a lot of stuff. Like I was talking about with the steam engines, it took decades for them to get uh, high enough. Like at first, when they were draining coal mines, the coal was right there. So they were super inefficient. And
Yeah.
then they got better. The steam engines were so much better than the coal pumping, the water pumping
Mhm.
things. And then, of course, now it's tremendously more efficient. And the super chiefs, the great steam engines that went across the continents, they were they were fabulous. Really high pressure, super critical. Meanwhile, I was going to say, as far as the high tech, SpaceX was that has already happened, and of course, that's a really high end industry going into orbit. But
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you talk about evolution. Like if you look at their the engines that they're using on the Starship, the third generation engine, people said, well, that can't possibly work. It doesn't have enough components, essentially. And
mhm,
they managed to build a whole bunch of it right into the body of the engine, it looks like. So
yes,
rather
yeah.
amazing.
Instead of having hundreds of bolts, nuts and bolts that have to be put on, it's just one big thing. So that makes it much smaller. And then there's places nothing's really happening, so you can have a gap there. You have less material, which allows it to be lighter, and that's what uh, part of the things that makes Musk a genius was he said we're going to do a blank sheet of paper, a blank essentially design page, and that had not been done. Again, it was a commercial decision because government was doing it and they were cost plus. So if you found a way to make it cheaper, your payout was less.
Yeah.
So the big contractors, they never improved. And finally, when you got a private space company, he said, all right, I can make it a lot cheaper. And as soon as SpaceX did it, well, then the government contractors started doing it. And gee, what is it? There's the New Zealand company. There's there's one company that wants to shoot rockets off of out of Great Britain somewhere. So there's a whole bunch of companies, and they're all doing it, including 3D printing.
Yeah. Well, there's one company that's like building the entire rocket body with 3D printing. I forget which one they are,
Mm-hmm.
but I gave you a link to the Raptor engine development and showing Raptor 1, Raptor 2, and Raptor 3. And not only did they increase the the power, but they simplified the design so there's fewer moving parts or fewer
Mm-hmm.
parts in general and more reliability. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that's another one where they don't. There's a lot of place things you have to have special jigs. Well, if you're doing it with 3D printing, and you just change the design uh, a significant amount, but not like a totally new concept, well, then you can change the designs faster.
Hmm.
And so that's another reason for it. And that's if we're going to be this is just the first one of the major things, and we might go around to it some more. A spacefaring society, it's got to be a lot cheaper, and one of the ways is 3D printing, including 3D printing in space, where like you were talking about, if you're like you were talking about being in the Pacific Ocean. Well, if you're on the moon,
Even more
that's
so.
tremendously more. And we're talking about a couple $1,000s to go, or maybe SpaceX maybe get it down to $100 a pound to get it to low Earth orbit. Well, that would still be several $1,000s to get something to the moon.
Hmm.
So if you have your uh, when you're carrying something over that, just that part might be several $1,000s, but you've got to have it in a shipping container, and you've got to wait for the next launch to get there. So we're
Yeah.
talking about weeks to get to this. This is for your air purification system, you don't have weeks. You're in a
Exactly.
hurry. Yeah. So,
Indeed.
so that's one we can come. Actually, this might be a good time to come back to it. And here, I was looking for things. I can't remember. He's actually a Canadian who's agricultural consultant, and he was talking about 3D printing as one of the revolutionary things. That's why it's not your grandpa's farm anymore. It's not this
No.
guy with ruddy cheeks and a flannel shirt and bib overalls. And
Well,
computers, farmers have their computers and they have drones, and they're the ones in particular. If your
yeah.
combine breaks down and you need some specific part, you don't want to wait for a factory off in the east coast of Canada or like upstate New York or somewhere, Pittsburgh, to make a part. It gets in a plane, it goes to Calgary, and then it goes in a truck. It goes another day of the truck. So by the time that's all happened, it could be a week or so, and
Yeah.
then the winter is coming. Your wheat hasn't
Exactly.
been harvested.
Yeah, well, yeah, we only have so much time to get the crop out of the field and into the grain bins. And
Mm-hmm.
if you miss your window, then the snow starts to fly around here.
Yeah,
So,
or just the rain. If you get
yeah,
fall rains and your wheat is wet, damp, and it's falling over, you got to wait for it to dry out.
exactly.
And, and then, like you say, then the snow comes. I think I might have mentioned what's in my hometown that in the 30s it was so dry that there was Lake Lake Byron nearby dried out, and they raised a crop of wheat on the floor of the lake. It was totally dried out,
Hmm.
but a little rain came, and the combine, one of the combines was stuck in the mud.
It's still
And
there.
so they said, well, we'll wait till it dries out, then we'll get some horses and a tractor to pull it out. But then it rained a lot, and the combine was never recovered.
Yeah, that's unfortunate story. There's been lots of stories about cars and things falling through the ice. Well, the ice road truckers,
Mm-hmm.
they had a vehicle go through this spring as well. So,
Oh, yeah. Or Garrison Keeler had the story about they would always have a winter fishing, ice fishing season, and Fred Johnson always led the parade of pickup trucks going out there. And he did he led the group because he was he'd lost a pickup truck dropping through the ice. And so the chance of that happening twice to the same guy just seems it's impossible. So it'd be safe for him to lead the
I,
trucks.
I don't think that is scientific thinking.
See, why not? It's statistics.
Lightning never strikes the same place twice, only it does.
Yeah, right. Okay, anyway, so that's a major commercial thing that's parts for farm places, places out of the ocean, definitely places out in space. So that's still a minor market now, but definitely little towns, the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, uh, they're far from main airport links and things. And of course, just about most of Canada, after that first 100 miles over the border, it's 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 a long road and from the nearest airport. And
Well,
so,
we're getting to the point where like the 3D printers are pretty advanced. And, you know, like if I had one, I don't have one myself, although it's kind of on my
mhm,
bucket list to get. If I had one, I'd be like printing toys for my kids and stuff because I do have the 3D software to do all of that. I got SolidWorks here.
mhm,
And so making the models is easy. And then you just convert them to STL or whatever format the 3D printer takes in, and
mhm,
off it goes and prints its thing. Yeah, one of the you know ideas that's been out there for some time is if you had a part, well, exactly what you're describing, if the part breaks, rather than throwing out the whole thing. I remember thinking on VCRs, I had a component that broke years ago. I was like, I got to throw out this whole thing because this one stupid part's broken.
Hmm.
And to get a replacement part, like you said, would take months, and then you have to specify it, and it's like a lot of times you couldn't even order them. This is the same issue that I had actually. A more recent example,
Hmm.
our water heater has a high altitude fan on it, and the bearing on the fan burned out. And
Yeah.
so it's like I call in the plumber, and he takes it apart. He says, "Yeah, that's it. The bearing's burned out here. You're gonna have to help buy a whole new unit." How much is that? $850. I'm like, okay. And so I did a bunch of research, and I was like, okay, I literally found the bearing that had died, and started calling around. It was difficult. Like we live just outside of Red Deer, so it's 100,000 people. It was difficult to find the proper size bearing to replace that sucker. But in the end, the bearing itself only cost $10.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. But I mean, I
That might
spent,
be a new income source for you.
well, no, the thing is, my hourly billing rate, well, I'm not going to give you my hourly billing rate, but it's
Almost let it go.
upward of $200 an hour anyways. And,
Hmm.
uh, if you consider the amount of time that it took me to source that, it was more than a day of lost work. And I did it just because I figured, oh, this is on principle, I guess.
Hmm.
But in the end, I'm glad I did. It was an interesting experience and
Hmm.
got to see how all that worked. So those machines are incredibly simple when you take them apart and look at how they work. And yet, we're so reliant on them working properly. And a
Yeah.
stupid $10 bearing can make the difference between your pipes freezing or not. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Of course, the issue that's come uh, they're working on is for bearings, you need a pretty good metal, and that's what they didn't have at first. In fact, they only had plastic at first, and then it got the lower temperature and less hard metals. But now they're printing faster. They have more quality things, which is, of course, it looks simple. It's doing simple things, but there's so many more ways to mess up with 3D printing.
mhm.
So it was a long time getting them good enough to where they would be confident enough to make the new the replacement trailer hitch that isn't going to break. And the first time you're trying to pull something up on or make a turn and your trailer
Mhm.
is going the other way.
Yeah. I don't know if you can go in and open up on the side and share that web page just for a moment, and that
Oh,
shows
I can actually. Let's see.
it just shows the three raptors that I was talking about there.
Let's
I'm
see.
sure that most of the people who would be interested in watching this are familiar with it, but it's rather amazing to see
Mhm.
how much more simplified the final design is. And I'm not saying the Raptor 3 is the final design even, um, but going from that basically cobweb nest of pipes and wires and ending up with something that's so streamlined.
Yeah, I'll stop share for a second here and we can take a look at it. And now there's chat, and I see one
One item in the
message.
chat, yeah.
There it is. So living with gravity.com.
Yeah, if you open it up, it's just an image.
Mm-hmm. And let's see. Well, actually, I'll go back to sharing again, and hopefully I can. Let's see. I'm not quite tricky enough to do that. It's like, uh,
You should just be able to click on share, screen share, and then
yeah, my screen share is disappearing. And let's see if I put, there we go. I just put it to the side. Come back here. Yeah, there's my share. And now we can, everybody can see. Okay, open up. Oh, I forgot. Gotta hit share again. There. Now, can you see the three engines
yeah, it
at
just
your
popped
end?
up. Yeah.
Okay, I'll make them a little bigger here too.
Yeah,
Okay, right.
so like when SpaceX went to the second design, people thought that was really revolutionary, and now with the third design, it's like they've eliminated anything that looks superfluous on that, and it's just the bare bones. It's almost as if they just took away everything that was small pipes and wires,
Hmm.
and that's what you're left with. And a lot of aerospace designers, when they saw that, they were like, "Oh, well, where's the rest of it?"
Yeah, because the first one looks like just a snake pit of all of them writhing tubes and wires and such.
And it's interesting because, of course, each one has its own serial number and stuff. So I think, like, and they were producing them for, I don't know, they probably got hundreds of each. Um,
Yeah.
but not only are those more complicated in the way that they look and stuff, but they're a lot more expensive to produce as well.
Oh,
So
yeah. For just that reason, it's all the labor. A lot of those things have to be assembled and bolted on, or brazed on, or welded on, depending on what kind of metal it is,
yeah,
and tested. So this.
and so those older styles are the ones that they're using for these test flights right now.
Mhm.
And as far as I know, and they haven't even gotten into the newer ones because, well, they're just doing test flights, but the newer ones are going to be that much more reliable. So
Yeah, fewer things, fewer parts to break. So, and of course, I got to confess, what is TF? The thrust is in.
yeah, it's probably a thrust factor or something like that. So they
Hmm,
have a sea level and a vacuum rating. Oh,
okay.
no, that's tons force, I think.
Okay, tens of force.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that was we're saying it's their sea level goes to 185, and the next generation 230, and the next generation 280 at
it's
sea level.
incredible. So fully one third more thrust from the third generation over the first.
Mhm. Oh, and our our back is sea level and probably in vacuum.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
R
exactly
in
right. It's
vacuum, but I'm not. No, I wonder what the R is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it stands for offhand either, but it's basically the difference between sea level thrust and space thrust.
Mm.
Yeah. And if they're using them in space, they usually have a bigger bell, I think, on them as well. So they have something they can just basically wrap around the outside there. When you
Hmm.
look at the launches, if you follow those, they have the live video and it's showing on the
Hmm.
um, on the ship itself, not the booster,
Hmm.
but on the ship itself, they have three smaller engines and three larger engines, and the larger ones are the vacuum engines because they expand the gas more to make it more efficient.
Oh, yeah. Or yeah, the gas wants to expand because there's no pressure against it. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, yeah, we looked at these spiffy engines, and now let's see if I can get back to where I was at. And so SpaceX, and we were talking about that. I got another totally different thing. I just ran across this the other day. This what got me interested in that. It's a YouTube thing. There, uh, 3D metal printing in Ukraine is changing war.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you're going to want to stop sharing that one and then just open up your presentation again.
Oh, this is part of my presentation.
Oh,
I mean,
no,
can you see it? Three.
no, I'm still seeing the engines on there.
Oh dear. Okay. Now, why is it? Well, you know what? I can do.
You need to go down and stop sharing down at the bottom.
Yeah. Or I'm thinking I can see if that does it. And
Yeah,
now I want to go back to my
yeah. So
PowerPoint.
all you did there was you closed the window that you had open. So I'm seeing the Zoom being shared right now. So what you need to do is go down and stop sharing. So that'll close that window, and then you have to open up a different window to share.
Open up another window. Okay, I'll
There
do
you
it then.
go.
Start fresh. Now, oh, share. Now do you see plowshare?
Yeah, there is a
Okay,
plowshare there. So
and
is
that
that a
was my,
video that you can play?
uh, yeah, you know, I wonder if it would. Although I think it's about
That,
10 minutes long.
that's just a graphic there, I think. So I don't think it'll link.
Yeah, I think I copied it over. Yeah, yeah, it's just a graphic.
But
But you
it's
can find it by the how 3D metal printers are changing for the Ukraine. And the reason I thought it was important, I mean, he was talking about it. He was lauding the Australians. And apparently, they got their own research effort, and they got a little American money, and they have a, a 3D printer station that's built in a box, and it's toughened. It's ruggedized, so
Mhm.
they can put it on a crane. The crane puts it on a, a back of a truck or in a little trailer, and it can go bouncing around the countryside. And if again, it's not an agricultural equipment; it's war making equipment. If
Right.
some item breaks, and the mechanism that points a cannon and swivels it around, they can make it on the spot, and that increases the amount of equipment they have available. So it's one thing you have. It's how much equipment you have working at any one time. But for the peacetime, getting back to the combine up in up in the middle of Saskatchewan, this is the kind of stuff that a local, and once they've made a few hundred of these, then people say, well, we've got the design. This is something a blacksmith shop
Mhm.
in a small rural town, but that's surrounded by several thousand farmers and ranchers within 100-mile radius. Well, if they had one of those stations, then they could make the parts. And so that's the kind of thing. You go to your parts store might be. I mean, the ag equipment store might be the place that has their own shop for
Mhm.
doing those repairs, and they would have the connections to the John Deere and International Harvester and all those outfits, and they say, yeah, this is the part we need. How much is it? And the guy says, it's $50 for hopefully just $50 for this one part. And, I mean, it would add up for a lot of parts, but if you just have one part and you don't have to ship anything, it's
Well, so that opens up a whole other can of worms. So it's like, you can get gene sequencers now. You can build
mhm,
proteins and all this sort of stuff. The technology is there. So if you can build a plowshare, going back to the Bible, they're beating swords into plowshares.
mhm.
It can be done the other way around. So anybody who has this 3D metal printing technology could go into business making gun barrels or something
Oh,
else too, right?
yeah, ghost guns. Uh, there's a lot of crazy people who are really thrilled by Luigi Mangione.
Oh yeah, exactly.
He,
Yeah.
he used a 3D printed pistol that he made. It wasn't fancy or automatic or anything. I think he just had to load it in and uh, uh, close the breech, and I mean close the back of the pistol and pull the triggers. It wasn't like he could fire automatic or anything,
Well,
but
and that idea has been around. Like, uh, I remember seeing it in a movie where, oh, what the hell's his name? I'm bugsing. I can't remember his name. John Malkovich had a character, and he literally did a 3D printed or composite gun that could go through, a metal detector. And the idea that it was that he
Oh
was
yeah.
supposed to get close to the president and kill him at short range type of thing.
Oh
So
yeah.
that
It
idea
was
has been around
The
for,
Clint Eastwood movie. It
yeah,
was
yeah, there you go.
Clint Eastwood was trying to find this guy, and the guy was making jokes about him and stalking the Secret Service agent, which is Clint Eastwood. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like yeah, that idea has been around for quite a
Mm.
while, and this technology just makes it that much easier. And same thing with like I was mentioning earlier with biological weapons and
Hmm.
sort of thing. I mean, I don't know where you stand on it, but there seems to be a lot of evidence that the whole COVID vaccine, or not vaccine, the whole COVID virus escaped the lab, and they were doing
Hmm.
um, research on how to make that virus more dangerous.
The term is gain of function research,
Exactly, yeah.
and it would supposedly they would learn how to make better vaccines to save lives. However, that type of research was illegal in the United States, and so they went to China, mainland China, People's Republic of China, and hired those people to do it. They would so it was they went they contracted with Igor, and Igor spilled the virus.
Uh, it's like,
We could blame China, but it was like these people came and offered him a whole bunch of money, and I could see him like, okay, yeah,
yeah,
we can do
well,
that.
or if you think of the young Frankenstein reference, whose brain did you take, Igor?
Abby,
Abby.
Igor, Abby, who? Abby
Abby
normal.
normal.
Yeah. Well, the other, the weapons of war, people make those. Uh, they are more complex. It might be harder to do, but the more important thing is for the commercial things. If it's just individual parts, somebody might be able to bootleg, and that goes back to that initial issue with the
Yeah.
duplicators with Murray Leinster.
Well, so
If
let's
somebody
say,
can bootleg them, then maybe that will cut down on the profit of making the original things, and that might slow down innovation.
yeah.
So that's the worry there.
That's been a problem with copyright laws and all sorts of stuff. And should you be
Mm-hmm.
able to get a book from the library without the author getting paid for it, and all these sorts of things? It's the same kind of thing. Now, as an engineer, I look at that and I say, okay, well, maybe I could 3D print this part, and maybe I have the right metal to do it, and all that sort of stuff. But
Yeah,
how much?
yeah.
How,
You have actually. I got some dental work done, and they had a little laser thing that they worked around in my mouth. And when they got done, there was a picture of what every tooth was and the
yeah,
space where they're going to put a replacement tooth in. So you have these two pieces that are broken
3D
apart.
scan. Yeah.
You put them together, you run your little laser over it, and say, I probably need a metal that's this strong.
Yeah,
So
but so I guess
mhm,
if you can reverse engineer it, you got the 3D scanner to do all of that. You can get the shape of it pretty accurately. There's still other issues like heat treatment and these things. But
mhm,
in a pinch, let's say that you're in the middle of the harvest, the part breaks. You've got another order that's going to take 3 weeks to get there, so you can get it fixed for next year. In the meantime, you need to have this thing working. You might not need a part that can last several million cycles. You just need something that'll last a few 100,000 cycles,
mhm,
and get back to work and get your harvest in. So then you can
mhm,
make a cheap part and as a replacement.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so I mean that's possible. Interesting, you were talking about that scanning technology. I was just watching a video uh, from National Geographic,
mhm.
and some of their researchers have gone to the volcano in Vanuatu, which is constantly erupting, and like it's one of these volcanoes that always has a lava lake in it.
Hmm.
and they were able to use 3D drones to map the entire internal part of the crater in high resolution. They ended up losing a few drones in the process because
That's what I was going
they
to
got
say.
a bit too close
They,
to the hot
I think there
fumes
are a
and
couple of
stuff. But
episodes where they were trying to use drones, and the drones got melted in the first day, and it's
pretty much, yeah. I mean, you think about it, just the radiant heat from that lava lake is over 1,000 degrees if you get too close. So it's pretty intense.
Mhm.
But yeah, fascinating technology. It really is. And of course, even like, I got my Apple smartphone here. This is a couple generations old now, iPhone 13, and it's got LiDAR built right into it. I mean, you just download the LiDAR software and you can do those 3D scans yourself.
Oh wow, yeah, that is amazing. Because that's another one where my gripe is there's you know 2 dozen, maybe 4 dozen different apps on the cell phone, and they don't have a manual for it. They do.
Yeah,
I'll say, yeah, I won't say the company's name, but it starts with T. Uh,
yeah. My son's coming to say goodnight. Come on over here, buddy.
okay,
Have a good night. I love you. Sleep well, okay?
cool. Okay, well then I got to getting away from metal. They also have concrete. Let's see if I can get there. There we go. Brownsville, Texas opened its first 3D printed Starbucks.
Hmm.
And again, that's something where instead of buying all kinds of parts and you're mixing different loads of cement and you're connecting or nailing or whatever, it's just you load up the 3D printer and up you go. Now you might also have the modules like a kitchen module or and certainly the bathrooms,
Hmm.
a bathroom for a house or just a restroom for the men's and women's rooms. But the main structure, there it is. And again, they've got ways that the uh, yeah the equivalent of rebar, however they reinforce it, that's put in there,
Hmm.
and it's another way for getting cheaper housing for all those uh, unhoused people that are driving the prices up and having their problems.
Well, and it's very interesting. My I shared a video of one of the cities, I think Guangzhou or some city in China, and it was showing the housing in, I don't know, 1990 or something like that,
Mhm.
and comparing it to today, and it doesn't even look like the same place because they
Oh
used to
yeah.
have the old communist era block apartments and this sort of stuff, and now they've got high rises that have like video projecting on or being emanated from the screen, the facade and all this stuff, and amazing looking architecture. It's not like the old Soviet
Mhm.
era block houses that you see if you go to Prague and places like that in the suburbs. Anyways, so one of my friends was like, "Oh yeah, well, Justin Trudeau or not Justin Trudeau, Carney, if they get into building houses, they're just going to end up having these socialist block houses." And I was like, "Okay." And one of these videos came up in my feed, and it was an apartment from New York City, and probably in Manhattan or something like that. And it was like this tiny little apartment that you hardly had enough room to turn around and stuff.
Oh
The
yeah.
the bed is 2.5 feet below the ceiling, and but the lady is, she loves living there apparently, even though she has to share the restroom with everyone else on that floor.
No.
um, and she pays like $800 a month for the honor of living there, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a step up. And I'm pretty sure that if the Canadian government was going to be making apartments, they would probably, each one would probably have its own washroom and shower stall.
Hmm.
So, anyway, my point is that yeah, we've come a long way from mud huts and teepees and sod houses and stuff to even like what Carney's talking about these days is modular homes. So build the houses in factories, kind of like mobile homes, but
Oh yeah.
designed to be permanently fixed into an area, and it can be assembled very quickly and
Okay.
have good quality built into it right from the factory. So
Yeah. Well, the 3D printing would be this one particular way of going about that. In fact, you could have entire modules. In fact, you do have companies that sell them. Well, I think we were even talking about some of them, different companies that you did some work for one company that had their mobile
yeah,
office complexes or office things that they would move to be near work sites and whatnot. But
yeah, exactly. And I'm actually modeling restroom right now that's used for special events. So you just drag this out. It's on a skidded structure, so you just drop it off wherever it's needed for the weekend or whatever, and then you can come back and pick it up. And of course, it has the wastewater storage and all that stuff, and you can clean it out with what my friend used to call a honey truck. Comes along and sucks out all the sewage.
yeah, so sounds like you're talking about a deluxe. Say, one of the companies is Porta Potty, another one is
Yeah,
Santa Can. So
yeah. So this
this is
isn't.
a fancier one with lights and a
Yeah,
nice
it
sink and
actually
stuff.
is a building, so you could use it in the middle of winter and stuff, and it's got heating and electrical connections and all that stuff.
Uh,
So it's like a washroom that you would find at any sporting event, only you can have your sporting event out in the middle of a field someplace.
okay, yeah, that sounds like yeah, this is a good thing. And hey, you can make a modular if they wanted to have 5,000 of them for, gee, well, actually, like if some major event where you're moving people, it goes back to military things. That's hey, they could barracks and stuff, and
Yeah,
you could have tents, and then you'd have the portable biffies and things.
yeah.
So
As
modules. Whoop, uh, oh, hello. Yes, don't worry, it won't show you if the shy person coming in. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, concrete, 3D printing, and goes along with modules that you can do some of it. And again, that's the kind of revolution we seem to need because for kind of related ways, both Canada and the United States have gotten their not enough housing constructed. They're falling further and further behind, and that and we're really going to see it now. Where we lost, I think about 15,000 structures all told between the two major fires,
oh
and
wow, yeah.
it like 3 weeks ago, they Altadena got its first permit approved. 4 months later,
Wow,
one
wow.
permit.
That's hard to imagine that they can't do things a bit faster, even in light of an emergency. I mean, you'd think it's like, okay, let's make City Hall work a little bit more quickly. Let's hire some more people to go out and review the plans or whatever. And I don't know, even if they use the old plans for the buildings that were there, you'd think that should be a possibility too. That's
Yeah, that helps. I think that was a building that was it was rebuilding an old building.
yeah. I
Oh
mean,
well.
there are certain code things that change over the years, but
Mhm.
for the most part, you should be able to get by with the old design, and if it's been approved once, it should be approved again, right?
Yeah, but that would be another thing if you could do if you have some standard module designs uh, with the electronics, you could have 50 different designs and you pick one, so it won't be entirely like the
Yeah,
Stalin blocks of apartments. You can have different things.
yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that the Canadian government was doing, even under the Trudeau government. They were looking at how can we build like streamline it so that we can say, okay, this is a standard design that anybody can use. It's like, we're giving you the architectural plans essentially, and it meets all of the building code requirements, and it has these kinds of design features that should be acceptable to the local building community and this sort of
Wow.
stuff. Yeah, and so that was one of the proposals that the federal government was working on. And I mean, I don't know that, and the intention is for it to be for like low cost housing, right? To get a whole bunch of stuff built more quickly and less expensively.
Hey, that sounds like a great idea. Of
Well, are you familiar with the FEMA dome homes?
the FEMA ones
Yeah.
and the
So
uh,
FEMA has essentially a design for building structures that are hurricane proof, earthquake proof, tornado proof, and they're based on a dome structure. So you think of an igloo with concrete. It's
hmm,
essentially what it is, and people have come up with fancy variations on that, but
hmm.
because of the inherent strength of the dome shape, you're able to do quite a few interesting things with it.
Ooh, put that one in the chat again. In
Sure.
fact, maybe I should have gotten it before from you, but for sure I'll get it because I definitely have an interest in it. Uh, I know a lot of people who lost their houses in the
Yeah,
fires.
that's pretty unfortunate. Dome.
Yeah, while you're getting that, another thing is for exotic things, the 3D printing might work for something they've already had. They have canneries, factories, or things. So they can make their pizzas at a higher rate. So that's another thing where you could get your produce faster.
Yeah, yeah. They
That's
like a lot of the FEMA stuff. Communities that have been hit by tornadoes, uh, they'll build like a football stadium or something like
hmm
that, and it'll be made with this design so that it can be used as a community shelter later on for if there's another disaster that
hmm
people can go in and shelter and be safe from the tornado. I know that in the community north of where I live here in Lacombe, they there was a church that was built with that using the FEMA equations,
hmm
and so I think they can fit about 3,000 people in this church.
hmm
But it can be scaled down to individual people's homes and stuff as well. So
Cool.
I haven't found the link to all of the community stuff, but I'll give you a couple of links to more of the um, auditoriums that shaped kind of structures. So
Cool.
they're just basic plain designs, but some of the homes, like they'll have a dome for the garage, a dome for the main structure. The bedrooms might have a separate dome or something like that, and they can all be connected together through little arched hallways or something, right? And they're done with concrete shotcrete that they basically come in and inflate a big balloon, and then they put
hmm
down wiring over top of it for rebar, and then they just basically shotcrete the whole
hmm
thing.
Yeah, and that's a more labor intensive thing, but it's still yeah, a lot cheaper than conventional things where the truck drops off the two by fours and maybe a few big beams and there's a stack of shingles on a
Exactly. And in
mhm,
terms of labor, it's a lot less than if you think of having to put up each individual wall. And essentially, you build like a pony wall around it, and then you just build up from that.
mhm. And it's again the your dome doesn't have to be a full dome because I did see somebody had a design in Texas when I was there. Then we're talking, well, gee, pushing 60 years ago,
Yeah,
and they it was like a half dome, so
exactly.
you could have an open, with some big picture windows looking out, but the back was a dome, and You'd have your kitchen and bedrooms and things in there. And in fact, you might even have a lighter thing on the front that would be a it'd be closed off, but that area it could uh, it could be cooler in the winter and warmer in the summer. It's like a yard, but it's
Yeah.
still closed off. And then deeper inside at the back of the dome, you could have it reinforced in case you have a tornado or something.
Yeah.
Because a lot of houses are now. That was one of the innovations with the Levitts, where they made Levittown,
Yeah.
and they saved money by no basements, just a
Hmm.
slab construction. But if you have slab construction, you don't have uh, a tornado shelter.
No,
Like the
no,
basements
exactly.
were always great for that.
Well, like I remember when I went down this, I spent 6 months after I graduated high school, lived with my uncle and aunt in Florida. And I was surprised nobody has a basement. And he said, well, yeah, the water table's like 2 feet down. So
Yes.
it kind of makes it hard. Um,
Hmm.
so, and they don't have, they don't have to deal with winter or anything like that. So yeah, everything was just slab construction.
Hmm.
Anyway, I gave you a couple of links in the chat there.
Yeah, I got those links. So that is all to the good. And
And the interesting thing is like a lot of these dome homes, they look different, but they don't, some of them you can't even tell that they're a dome. They built them up in a way that looks almost traditional.
bingo. Yeah. And then I guess we were talking about modules or 3D printing. You could have one or the other or some combination.
Well,
Uh,
and one of the other options is all of these sea cans that are coming over from China. People are turning those into homes. And I got a friend who's got kind of like a hunting cabin that he has out in the woods. That's just a shipping container that he's converted into a cabin. Doesn't
yeah.
need to have a lot of insulation or anything. He only uses it in the fall. It's not like he's spending time there in the middle of winter. But what's great about the shipping containers is they're designed to be, hermetically sealed, so you don't have to worry about it leaking or anything like that.
Hmm. And well, you might, speaking of shotcrete, you could have uh, spray on insulation,
Yeah.
just like another, well, kind of a related thing in the wine country of California. They used to be, they wanted caves. They had a few caves, but a lot of places, it's open country. So what they do, it looks like a Quonset hut, and then shotcrete, and
Yeah.
then foam insulation over the top of the shotcrete, and it's an artificial cavern. It's a
Yeah.
wine cellar,
Yeah.
even though it's on on the surface.
Yeah. Totally works. Cool. Anyway, so this might be a good place to end it. There's a lot of innovative
Mhm.
technology and 3D printing. I think we're going to get to a point where just about everybody has a three, or maybe not everybody, because some people just don't want to be technically bothered with this stuff. But
Mhm.
every street will probably have somebody who's got a 3D printer in their house that you can go to and get stuff printed, and it'll be almost like what Kinko's was years ago, where you could get everything printed there, and now you can get stuff 3D printed.
Yeah,
In
well, that
fact,
yeah, it's a great business model for it, sure.
yeah,
And Kinko's is still there. Or I mean, it's not Kinko, it's FedEx bought them out. But yeah, we go down there and they do actually they do some of the more exotic things. Of course, mostly printing, but
yeah. Well, at the end, Kinko's was doing. They had a 3D printer in Calgary, at least, so you could go in and
mhm,
get something printed out from
mhm.
them.
But certainly, like we were saying, the agricultural machinery makers, a regular blacksmith shop would be doing things. Maybe car dealerships would be another, or automotive repair places. Again, if their factory is in Tennessee or Osaka, Japan, it's like it gets to be a long wait for getting things.
Well,
And older vehicles where they don't make parts anymore, that they can just keep the design information on file,
yeah,
and you still pay your license fee of $20 or $40, and the
yeah.
maker
I,
outfit fabricates it right there.
it's amazing how you can still get parts for old cars. And I know lots of people who restore, you know, Model Ts or some, Studebakers or whatever, these old vehicles. I had a 58 Beetle. That was my first vehicle that I had. And it operated on a 6-volt battery. And I remember going out and buying a new starter motor for that, and it was still available. You just go down and order it. Might take a couple of weeks to get in, but they could get it in. The auto parts system is really extensive,
Yeah.
and so you can get those parts. Somebody's got it in a warehouse in most cases, and even like I had some vandals. I was driving a, what was it? 2006 Kia Amante, and some vandals broke the window and stole some stuff out of my car. And you know, I was able to get a replacement window from a junkyard, right? And
Mhm.
um, basically, the insurance company was like, "Well, we want to get you a new one." And I said, I don't care if it's new or not. I just need something to close my window at this point. And if it's got some scratches in it, I can live with it. And they said, "Okay, fine. If you're good with that, we'll get it out there and you'll have it tomorrow." So
All
yeah,
right.
the recycling from the auto parts scrap yards is pretty amazing. So
Yeah, that's something that's been going on for a century now, since probably the first year after Henry Stewart Ford started making Model Ts. There were
yeah,
used parts,
exactly.
and he had parts. But anyway, well, this is sounding good, and we've done good. It's 9:40 your time, so I'll let you go, and we'll see. I think I'm still good for next week. So we got to think about a a topic for it, but we can worry about that over the week.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Yeah, we'll chat next week. I think I'm available. And thanks for the discussion tonight and sharing your 3D printing stuff.
Okay, and remind me if I don't get it to you in a few days.
Yeah, at this point, I'm comfortable enough. If you want to just go ahead and post it, if you're happy with it, go ahead and post it on
Okay.
YouTube. We're good.
Yeah, they say don't edit them. It's This is what our conversation was, and we'll go on
Yeah,
to other stuff.
unless it gets flagged by YouTube for having inappropriate content or something.
Uh, yeah, design things. We'll find out. Or I'll find
Fair
out.
enough.
It's got my name on it at the on the YouTube. Anyway, talk to you probably next week then.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay,
Carl.
and
Hi,
goodbye,
Roger.
everybody else.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.